Have you ever found yourself letting out a swear word or two after a frustrating run-through of a passage when it just doesn't sound the way you want it to? It might not sound like an especially good habit to get into, but what if I told you that there's some research which suggests that swearing could actually have a positive effect on tasks involving precision and fine motor control, and that the only thing most of us are getting wrong is the timing? Hi, I'm Noa Kageyama. I'm a performance psychologist and Juilliard-trained violinist, and I translate research from the performance science literature into practical strategies to help you practice smarter and perform your best when it matters most. Believe it or not, there's actually quite a bit of research on swearing. Studies have linked it to things like increased self-confidence, improved mood, greater psychological flow, and reduced inhibition. There's even some evidence that surgeons sometimes swear quietly while performing surgery or other fine motor tasks. So, what does that mean? Could swearing really have a measurable effect on tasks that involve precision and fine motor control, like playing an instrument? Today, we're diving into a 2026 study that took a closer look at exactly this question. The researchers recruited 61 university students and asked them to perform a manual dexterity task that basically involved picking up tiny pegs, turning them over, and putting them back into place as quickly and accurately as possible. Before they began, each participant picked two words: a swear word, like the sort of word they'd most likely say if they hit their thumb with a hammer, and a neutral word, like a word they use to describe a table. Then they performed the dexterity test twice. Before each attempt, they spent 15 seconds repeating one of the two words. Half started with the swear word, half started with the neutral word, and then they switched. So the question was, would 15 seconds of swearing have any noticeable effect on how quickly and accurately they performed the task? Well, as it turns out, yes. When participants spent 15 seconds swearing before the task, they were 2.5 seconds, or about 7% faster than when they repeated the neutral word. And in a follow-up study using a slightly different dexterity test, the researchers replicated this finding. Participants were about 6% faster after swearing than after not swearing. So this does appear to be a thing. But why? What is it about swearing that seems to help? Honestly, it's not entirely clear quite yet. One theory is that swearing reduces our inhibitions in the moment, and that this freer state somehow helps us perform better. The researchers actually tested for this, and the data didn't really support it, but they noted that the test they used to measure inhibition may not have been sensitive enough to pick up on a subtle effect, so the jury's still out. Other theories suggest that swearing might increase focus, boost confidence, or shift us into a more physiologically activated state. We don't yet know for sure, but if it turns out to be physical activation that's doing the heavy lifting here, that has some important implications for how and when we should put this technique into action. Because here's the thing. For a long time, researchers thought there was a kind of Goldilocks zone, and that everyone performed best at a moderate level of activation. Not too low, not too high. But it turns out that's not quite right. A psychologist named Yuri Hanen developed a theory called individual zones of optimal functioning, or IZOF for short, which suggests that each of us has our own unique optimal zone. Some of us perform best when we're pretty calm. Others do best at a moderate level. And a surprising number of people actually perform best when they're pretty amped up. I put a link to a deeper dive on IZOF in the description in case you want to read more. But why does this matter for our swearing study? Well, it matters because the participants weren't actually under any real pressure when they did the dexterity task. There were no nerves, no stress, no audience, nothing at stake. Which means the people who repeated the neutral word may have been a little too calm, possibly below their optimal performance zone. And maybe swearing helped to nudge them up closer to where they'd perform best. So how do we apply this to music? Thing number one, before a performance, pay attention to where your activation level actually is. Are you already feeling a lot of energy, where your heart is racing and the butterflies are pretty active? Or are you feeling kind of flat, a little checked out, maybe even yawning and low on energy? Both are pretty common, but each calls for a different course of action. And actually, one of the most useful things you can do over time is start tracking this, a quick 1 to 10 rating of your activation before each performance, paired with a note about how the performance went. Over a handful of performances, you'll start to see patterns. Some musicians find their best performances happen when they're at like a 7 or 8, pretty activated. Others find theirs come when they're at a 4 or 5, much calmer. Knowing your own zone can be a helpful piece of data in preparing for future performances. Thing number 2. If you're already pretty amped up and at the top of your optimal zone or past it, You'd want to do the opposite of what we've been talking about. Slow your breathing, ground yourself, dial things down. Thing number 3. But if you're feeling flat and below your optimal zone, that's where you want to think about ways to turn things up a notch or two. Some quiet backstage swearing isn't the most conventional pre-performance ritual for sure, but it might be just what you need to give yourself a small edge when you need that extra boost of focused energy. If any of this resonated with you and you'd like to go deeper on building pre-performance routines that help you walk on stage in your own optimal zone and play more like yourself when it counts, I put together a free 7-day email course called Pressure Proof. It guides you through some of the most essential strategies that performers use to shrink the gap between practice and performance. The link to sign up is in the description. And speaking of putting things into practice, research suggests that taking a moment to form a specific plan for how you'll apply something you've just learned can make you more likely to actually follow through. So before you go, what's one thing you're going to try differently before your next performance? Given the particular topic of this video, I'm a little scared to ask, but do keep it family friendly and leave it in the comments below.